The Nexperia expropriation didn't begin with a legal dispute. It began with a phone call from Washington. Dutch officials were told, in no uncertain terms, that continued access to critical American technologies depended on one thing: removing the Chinese ownership of a key semiconductor supplier. Within months, Nexperia, a major player in Europe's chip supply chain, was stripped from its Chinese parent company, not by market forces or judicial process, but through geopolitical fiat.
The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. But your voice is rising. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of it. Why'd have you checkmark subscribe to this channel for more fearless analysis from Richard Wolff and voices the mainstream media refuse?
What followed wasn't just corporate upheaval, but rupture across the European tech sector, particularly in the automotive industry, which relies heavily on Nexperia's components. This was not a European decision. It was a directive shaped in D.C., enforced in Hague, and felt across global assembly lines. This case is an outlier. It's a blueprint. The tactics used to isolate Nexperia are being replicated globally as the U.S. intensifies efforts to lock China out of the technological future. From economic sanctions to export controls, Washington is transforming traditional trade tools into strategic weapons, pressuring allies into alignment even when it damages their own industries. The cost isn't abstract. It's measured in disrupted supply chains, lost sovereignty, and accelerating division of the global tech landscape. As this doctrine spreads, the world edges closer to a bifurcated system where cooperation gives way to coercion, and every nation is forced to choose a side. This isn't just a trade war anymore. This is a global economic battlefield, and Washington is drawing lines with surgical precision and brute force. The United States has moved far beyond tariffs and diplomatic protests. It's now deploying its allies as economic weapons in a coordinated strategy to contain and confront China's rise. The message is clear: align with Washington's vision or face the consequences. National sovereignty, economic independence, collateral damage. All of it is being steamrolled under a new doctrine that weaponizes supply chains, corporate takeovers, and legislative pressure to serve America's geopolitical dominance. Take the Dutch semiconductor firm Nexperia. This wasn't just a company. It became ground zero for the latest phase of U.S.-China confrontation. Nexperia, a Chinese-owned company with deep roots in Europe's chip industry, was suddenly caught in a geopolitical chokehold. The U.S. government didn't like who owned it, didn't like who ran it, and didn't hesitate to act. Behind the scenes, Washington leaned on The Hague hard. Pressure, threats, ultimatums. The demand? Boot out Chinese leadership, seize control, and send a signal to Beijing. And the Dutch folded. The company was expropriated under the guise of national security, but make no mistake, this was Washington's playbook in motion. What followed wasn't stability or security. It was chaos. Beijing responded fast and hard. It banned the use of Nexperia chips, asserted its control over the company's Chinese assets, and sent a very clear message to the West. We're not playing defense anymore. The aftermath? A supply chain disaster. Automakers who depended on Nexperia's semiconductors found themselves scrambling. Contracts evaporated. Timelines blew up. The automotive industry, a cornerstone of the global economy, was thrown into disarray. All because of the backroom power struggle orchestrated not in Hague or Beijing, but in Washington. This is what the new U.S. strategy looks like in practice. Exert maximum pressure, force allies into compliance, and use economic tools like sanctions, export controls, and the entity list as weapons of coercion. These aren't defensive moves. These are offensive strikes, calculated to fracture the global tech ecosystem and isolate China by any means necessary. The goal? Prevent China from closing the technology gap, especially in semiconductors, the modern lifeblood of every economy. Oil powered the 20th century. Chips will define the 21st, and the U.S. intends to control the tap. But here's the paradox that Washington refuses to acknowledge. In trying to isolate China and slow its technological advance, these tactics are doing the opposite. The harder the U.S. clamps down, the faster China pivots. Forced out of the Western supply chain, Beijing is racing toward full technological self-reliance. The sanctions, the bans, the corporate seizures, they're pushing China into building its own semiconductor ecosystem, its own rare earth processing plants, its own AI infrastructure. The world is now heading toward bifurcation. Two separate technological spheres, one led by Washington, the other by Beijing. And stuck in the middle? The rest of the world. European countries, Asian economies, developing nations. They're being forced to pick sides in a high-stakes power struggle. Cooperate with the U.S. and lose access to Chinese markets. Refuse and face American sanctions. It's a Hobson's choice. No real alternative. Only costs. Countries that once thrived on global integration are now being told, decouple, conform, or collapse. The promise of globalization is giving way to block-based warfare, and the fallout is already visible. Supply chains are shattering. Industries that rely on high-tech components, especially automotive and consumer electronics, are facing unpredictable disruptions. The Nexperia case exposed just how vulnerable the system really is. When Washington intervenes and seizes control of a company halfway around the world, it doesn't just affect Chinese shareholders. It cripples production lines, delays shipments, and inflames diplomatic tensions. What was once a reliable, interconnected ecosystem is now a battlefield of retaliatory bans, national security reviews, and export blacklists. Allies are being forced to abandon strategic autonomy. Decisions about foreign investment, company leadership, and industrial policy are no longer being made in Berlin, Paris, or Seoul. They're being made in Washington. And the language is blunt. Fall in line or be cut off. This kind of economic coercion undermines sovereignty and breeds resentment, even among traditional partners. The U.S. calls it leadership. But to many, it feels like economic imperialism dressed up in national security rhetoric. Let's not kid ourselves. This isn't just about chips. The same playbook is being used in rare earth minerals, AI technologies, quantum computing, and biotech. These are the sectors that will determine who leads the global economy in the next 50 years. And the U.S. is making its intentions clear: dominate or destabilize. If it can't outcompete China, it will contain it. If it can't slow China's innovation, it will fracture the global system so no one can win. The irony is painful. The U.S. claims it's preserving global security, but its actions are accelerating division. It claims to protect the integrity of supply chains, but it's triggering their collapse. It warns against Chinese authoritarianism, yet it's now dictating terms to its allies with the same authoritarian impulse, just dressed in Western suits. The seizure of Nexperia wasn't just a policy decision. It was a signal fire, a warning to every government and company around the world. Your independence ends where America's strategy begins. This isn't diplomacy. It's coercion. Strategic dominance enforced not through consensus, but through threats and economic manipulation. And it's leading us toward a world where countries are forced into camps, global standards diverge, and cooperation becomes an afterthought. Washington's zero-sum mindset is setting the stage for systemic fragmentation, where once cooperative sectors are divided by walls of suspicion, rivalry, and incompatible technology. The consequences are far-reaching. We're not just talking about slower phone upgrades or pricier cars. We're talking about fundamental instability in how the world works. The institutions, alliances, and markets that kept the global economy running for decades are being re-engineered to serve one purpose: maintain U.S. supremacy, regardless of the fallout. The costs of being externalized to allies, industries, and consumers, all of whom are now pawns in a struggle that has no clear endpoint and no safe exit. Meanwhile, China isn't backing down. Every sanction, every company blacklist, every forced expropriation only reinforces Beijing's belief that it must go it alone. And they're moving fast. From chip design to rare earth extraction, from AI frameworks to green tech, China is building the infrastructure of independence. The more Washington tightens a grip, the more it motivates the very behavior it's trying to prevent. This is a strategic paradox at the heart of the U.S. doctrine. Containment that accelerates the threat. The Nexperia debacle didn't just cripple a company. It exposed cracks in the system. It showed how fragile our interconnected world really is when economic policy becomes a tool of war. And make no mistake, this is war just without bullets. It's fought with sanctions, corporate seizures, regulatory ambushes, and alliance manipulation. And it's only escalating. The next target could be another semiconductor firm, a rare earth mine, a satellite manufacturer, The battlefield is expanding, and neutrality is no longer tolerated. What started as a trade dispute has evolved into a full-spectrum economic war. The weapons are more sophisticated, the targets are more strategic, and the consequences are more profound. We're not heading into a Cold War. We're already in it. The only question now is how much damage this new doctrine will do before the world wakes up to the cost of playing economic enforcer in a system that used to run on cooperation. If you're tired of watching global alliances get twisted into weapons, if you're concerned about the rising costs of geopolitical chess, and if you believe the world deserves better than economic warfare masquerading strategy, then speak up. Share this video. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay informed. Because the world is changing fast, and silence is not an option. This is the uncomfortable truth. The United States isn't just targeting China. It's dragging the rest of the world into its economic battlefield. Allies, partners, neutral nations. It doesn't matter. If you're in the orbit of global trade, you're being told to pick a side. And the consequences of refusing? Devastating. Companies risk being locked out of American markets. Nations face retaliatory tariffs or threats of being cut off from critical technologies. The rules of international cooperation are being rewritten, and Washington is holding the pen. Let's be clear, this isn't happening in backrooms anymore. The tactics are bold, public, and unapologetic. Washington has weaponized its control over key choke points in global commerce, licensing regimes, chip-making equipment, financial access, and is now using those levers to dictate how foreign governments and companies behave. The goal is dominance over the infrastructure of the modern economy: semiconductors, rare earths, next-gen AI, green technologies. The message to the rest of the world is blunt. Either join the campaign to contain China, or prepare to be isolated from the tools of the future. Look at what's happening across Europe. Governments are increasingly being strong-armed into revising laws, scrapping business deals, and expropriating foreign assets. It's economic warfare, executed under the cover of national security. But national security for whom? Not for the Dutch when their semiconductor supply chain collapses. Not for Germany when their automakers can't get parts. Not for global consumers when prices surge and delays stretch into months. National security has become the justification for dismantling the very fabric of the global economy, and it's happening at Washington's behest. Nexperia is the warning shot, but not the last. The expropriation wasn't just about a single company. It was about testing how far Washington could push its allies. And now that the precedent is set, others will follow. Whether it's AI labs in France, battery manufacturers in South Korea, or quantum startups in Canada, the new standard is loyalty to U.S. strategic interests or else. The sovereignty of nations has been reduced to a variable in Washington's global equation. And here's what makes it worse. This strategy is being executed under the guise of preserving a rules-based order. That phrase, rules-based, is being thrown around like a shield. But whose rules? When the U.S. unilaterally decides who can trade, who can produce, and who gets access to key markets, the rules cease to be global. They become imperial. Washington is setting standards that no one voted on and then punishing those who fail to follow them. This approach is creating fractures that will take decades to repair. In the past, technological collaboration was a bridge. U.S. companies worked with Chinese partners. European labs teamed up with Asian manufacturers. Talent flowed across borders. Students, researchers, and engineers formed the connective tissue of a global innovation network. But now, borders are hardening. Trust is evaporating. And the message being broadcast is clear. Knowledge is power, and power must be hoarded, not shared. Beijing isn't taking this lightly. China is responding with its own version of decoupling, cutting off exports of critical minerals, blocking sales to foreign companies, and escalating its efforts to build a parallel technological universe. If the U.S. won't allow access to the tools of today, China will build its own for tomorrow. And once that world is built, reintegration may no longer be possible. We're watching the slow death of globalization, one coercive maneuver at a time. And it's not just about business. This strategy extends to academia, energy, infrastructure, and even finance. U.S. sanctions don't just target Chinese banks. They scare away anyone who dares to work with them. Export controls aren't limited to chips. They bleed into medical devices, clean tech, and telecommunications. The lines between military-grade equipment and civilian innovation have blurred. The U.S. government has essentially decided that if technology could one day help China, it must be blocked today, no matter the cost. That cost? It's already being paid. Countries that once benefited from open markets and diversified supply chains are now being forced to reorient their economies. Entire industries are being reshuffled, not because of market forces, but because of geopolitics. And for many, especially smaller nations, there's no winning path. Align with China and risk American retaliation. Side with the U.S. and lose access to the largest manufacturing ecosystem on Earth. These are not strategic partnerships. They're strategic ultimatums. We are entering an era of techno-nationalism, where the flags planted on silicon chips matter more than the technology itself. Where software isn't judged by performance, but by origin. Where research isn't shared, but siloed behind national firewalls. And once those walls are up, it's only a matter of time before the innovation pipeline slows, talent migrates, and progress stagnates. Competition once meant pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Now, it means cutting off rivals at the knees. And for what? For a containment strategy that might end up accelerating the very threat it seeks to stop. The more the U.S. clamps down, the more determined China becomes to escape dependency. That's not a theory. It's already happening. China is pouring billions into domestic chip production. It's nationalizing key technologies. It's restricting rare earth exports. And it's forging new partnerships with countries that don't want to be part of this economic Cold War. In other words, this strategy is backfiring, not just diplomatically, but economically. It's triggering the very bifurcation Washington claims to be preventing. And it's doing so at enormous cost to the industries and workers who depend on stability. Semiconductor companies can't plan. Automakers can't build. Consumers can't afford. All of it upended for a doctrine that prioritizes dominance over development. And while the U.S. portrays itself as defending freedom, the practical reality is that it's using fear. Fear of exclusion, fear of sanctions, fear of being left behind. This isn't leadership. It's coercion by another name. And it's eroding the very alliances it claims to strengthen. There's a path forward, but it doesn't look like this. It doesn't involve punishing partners, seizing companies, or forcing nations into false choices. Real leadership means building alternatives, not tearing down competitors. It means investing in innovation, not stifling it. And it means recognizing that global challenges, from climate to cybersecurity, require cooperation, not confrontation. Because if this continues unchecked, the world we knew, the one built on shared research, collaborative development, and economic integration, will be gone, replaced by suspicion, barriers, and economic blocks walled off from each other. A world where supply chains are weapons, companies are pawns, and nations are reduced to proxies in a struggle for dominance. That's not a future anyone should want. There's a reason this moment feels so volatile, because the stakes have never been higher. The United States is no longer trying to lead by example. It's leading by force. And what that force looks like today isn't tanks or drones. It's boardroom ultimatums, sanctions buried in legislation, and export bans that choke off entire industries overnight. This is 21st century warfare, where supply chains are the new front lines, and allies are expected to act like foot soldiers. And yet, even as Washington ramps up the pressure, cracks are beginning to show. Countries are questioning just how far they're willing to follow. How much economic pain can they absorb before they push back? Is sacrificing their industries, their investments, and their sovereignty worth staying in Washington's good graces? These are the questions European and Asian leaders are being forced to ask in private, even if they won't say it out loud. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The U.S. is creating the very world it claims to fear. A world where China is cut off from Western technologies and becomes even more determined to build its own. A world where American allies feel betrayed, manipulated, and expendable. A world where multilateralism dies, replaced by strategic blocks and transactional diplomacy. It's not peace. It's managed hostility on a global scale. And let's be clear, the companies caught in the crossfire are the canaries in the coal mine. Nexperia wasn't just an isolated case. It was a test run. And it worked. The U.S. flexed its influence, seized control through an ally, and sparked a chain reaction that disrupted entire sectors. Now, the strategy will be replicated over and over. The message has been sent. If a company threatens U.S. strategic interests, regardless of where it operates or who owns it, it can be dismantled by proxy. But this isn't sustainable. Not economically. Not diplomatically. Not morally. You can't build a stable world order on forced compliance and economic blackmail. You can't demand loyalty from allies while stripping them of the very independence that defines a true partnership. You can't champion free markets while using them as a battleground for geopolitical warfare. The risk now is fragmentation, total and irreversible, where standards diverge, where innovation splits, where the rules of commerce become battlegrounds of ideology. The West leads one system. China builds another. Everyone else is left to pick through the rubble, hoping to survive the fallout of a rivalry they never asked to be part of. This isn't about China's innocence or America's villainy. It's about the recklessness of turning everything into a zero-sum game. The world needs a reset. Not more ultimatums. Not more seizures. Not more walls. If you're seeing it too, if you recognize the danger of this path, then speak up. Hit like. Share this video. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe, because this isn't just another trade dispute. It's the beginning of something much bigger. And it's up to us to expose it, challenge it, and fight for something better.